For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael.
Morning. A fairly quiet day, really, as far as the Asian markets are concerned, Asia-Pacific markets in any case. There was some interesting, we're right in the middle of the US reporting season. We heard a little bit on Friday. We're going to hear more today, and we're going to hear rest about that. But Australia is up about 0.2%, which is the biggest gainer. There's some decent news out of China. They are exporting. They're exporting to Russia, and they're also exporting electric vehicles as well. So they're doing reasonably well. As far as Australia is concerned, it's going to talk barley with China, barley as in the crop barley. Now, again, the problem with this was that China put some huge import tariffs on imports of barley from Australia to China. They're thinking now that this may well be rescinded very, very slightly. But the most important thing, not so much the barley, but the other parts of the trade between the two countries that may come under discussion. As far as G7 is concerned, environmental ministers were meeting over the weekend. They left without any decision on coal in particular. That was looked forward to. They're still maintaining their sort of negative zero target to 2050. That's where it's gone to now, but no mention about coal. That was expected. EVs, electrical vehicles. We talked about China exporting quite a lot of those. They're coming down in price. Tesla is reducing prices by about 50%. Equinox is doing the same. VW will probably do a similar kind of thing. Now, what these companies are all doing is understanding that electric vehicles are actually too expensive for the average consumer. I don't really care about the price. I think it's much more important to know where the actual infrastructure of charging is going to be. But nevertheless, the manufacturers are bringing prices down. Singapore Central Bank is being slightly soft as far as inflation is concerned. It's reviewed its growth figures for this year right down to 0.5%, 3.6% in 2022. The range actually could be as high as 2% this year, but they feel as though it's unlikely. I bring you this merely because this is another nation which is suffering from inflation, and what they're doing is they're getting inflation down to start with and then worrying about growth. Now President Macron let's do the US recap. Sorry, first of all, stock prices are relatively flat. We got some decent stuff from Wells Fargo and JP Morgan on Friday. We've got Bank of America and Charles Schwab coming out today, Morgan Stanley too. So we'll hear about how these central bank or these big banks are actually dealing with the fallout from the from the regional bank failures. And Janet Yellen has been speaking, US Treasury Secretary. What she's saying is that instead of interest rate rises, maybe the whole of the United States should do fiscal measures and ask banks to slightly give more towards a recovery fund. As far as France is concerned, President Macron is now written into law the business about the pension law in France, despite the fact that the majority of the population doesn't want it, and that there is rioting in the streets, or there has been over the weekend, and more to come. Moody's has downgraded its outlook on Israel. Israel has been going through a lot of political problems there, as you well know, and the economy's taken a bit of a beating from the nationwide protests in the country. The exchange in Tel Aviv is down 14% on the month. So Moody's have downgraded them. Talking now about the UK and the Bank of England, as I brought this news to you last week, is thinking of expanding its deposit protection scheme to cover more businesses, more large businesses, and so on. It's up to £85,000 here. In the United States, it's $250,000. So there's a feeling that there is a way to go on that. UK strikes, they're still calculating how much these public sector strikes are actually hitting the UK economy. But the word from number 11 Downing Street, the Chancellor's office, the Treasury Minister, is saying that he would prefer to see inflation beaten and then worry about the strikes, which now look as though, particularly the nurses, may well continue into Christmas. The other contrasting side of this is that big business is relatively upbeat about business confidence, it appears. in this country. Of the CFOs as senior finance officers or company finance officers who were actually interviewed, 25% felt better about the UK. This is down to the fact they feel as though inflation has peaked. They're quite pleased with the Windsor Agreement on the future of Brexit and Europe and the rest of it. And also political turmoil appears to have disappeared. And very briefly, as far as commodities are concerned, oil rallies very, very slightly. There is an overall shortage of oil. Never mind what OPEC says. That's still being digested within the system. And gold will really wait to see what the Fed decides as far as interest rates are concerned. That's the global view this morning.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for giving us a global view this morning. Just to go to the electric vehicle, how it's going cheaper, do you think at any point we'll have the same price parallel with electric vehicles and petrol or gasoline vehicles in the near future? Bearing in mind government incentives, competition and the likes have reduced the costs for these vehicles.
They haven't necessarily reduce the charging cost of them. That's what we've got to see. Is electricity getting more expensive? Yes, it is. But it doesn't really matter. As I keep saying, I think the important thing is where is the infrastructure to charge these vehicles? When I was driving around at the weekend, I went to various garages for various sorts of reasons and saw a queue of people waiting to charge their electric vehicles. Now, until that's put right, of course, consumers may buy them. Prices are going to come down. Profit margins will reduce, but and they will cost. Electricity will cost as much. There is a lot of pricing going on right now. So I think we should hold our breath really for the future. But the key to it is where you charge your car. That's the most important thing.
Well, two quick things, Michael. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, is back from Washington, and he says that the UK economy is doing very well, and he was commended while in Washington for the efforts that he's been putting in. Well, is it not the same IMF that told us last Wednesday that the UK economy is going to shrink by 0.03% and will be, perhaps the worst performing economy among the G7 countries in 2023? So, which source is Jeremy Hunt quoting? And then today, the Prime Minister is going to give a speech to talk about the anti-math mindset, which is damaging the economy. And, even the Times Education Commission is saying, people must learn English and math till the age of 18. Okay, how will numeracy, improve the economy, make a difference one way or the other, apart from academics?
What this country is suffering from is a deficit of numeracy. There's no question about that, and there's a snobbishness about it, and that was completely shown by our tax-funded, person's tax-funded organisation, the BBC. When he last talked about this, they were poo-pooing the idea, saying because the majority of people who work at that organisation are arts graduates. I am one myself, but what he's saying is there is a deficit of numeracy. There always has been, and he's absolutely right about this. I couldn't agree with it more. People need to study maths until they're 18 so they can go into the world and do their own sums. That's what actually has to happen. As far as Jeremy Hunt's concerned, remember the IMF talked about 0.3% shrinkage. They were originally talking about 0.6. So they have improved their view of what's happening in the UK. And I understand they also congratulated Jeremy Hunt on running the economy when he said he wasn't going to give in to public sector strikes. So I'm not quite sure. Yes, of course, we will be amongst the worst performing economies in the G7 and indeed in the developed world. But there is room for growth in that. I think the IMF ought to be a little more definite about what it's actually saying right now.
Well, thank you very much, Michael Wilson. Now, for business updates across the African continent, Rotus Odiri joins us.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning to all our viewers. Yeah, just Nigeria, inflation and jobs. That's what we're going to be focusing on. On Saturday, the Bureau of Statistics released our latest inflation figures. 22.04% is where we are year on year. Now, across the board for every single metric, I think minus maybe the rural year-on-year inflation figures, we saw increases. So 22.04 from 21.91 in February. Food inflation now is nearing 25%, 24.45 and 24.35. Core inflation, when you strip out the volatile items, 19.86 from 18.8, and you see urban and rural inflation. Now, month on month, we saw a deceleration in February due to the cash scarcity where that reduced demand. That was a one-off. Well, month on month inflation now has continued its upward trajectory, 1.86 from headline food, 2.07, core, urban, rural, across the board. Now, what does this mean for the average Nigerian? Your disposable income is still under pressure. Savings and investments, real rates of return, negative, underwater, unless, of course, you consider using other securities or other savings items, perhaps even foreign, in order to keep your purchasing power afloat. So we continue to see this trajectory and we continue to see it climbing. Now, what about the Monetary Policy Committee? What does this mean for them? Essentially, they're going to have to keep on tightening. If you remember at the last MPC meeting, they raised it by 50 basis points to 18%, asymmetric corridor, cash reserve ratio, liquidity, all held constant. But because of the language that they've put out saying that we are chasing inflation, inflation continues to climb. So now it looks like they will be forced to continue to tighten. But again, remember these food supply shocks that the Governor Emefiele talked about. Monetary policy cannot attend to any of these. Increase in road transportation costs, security issues in food producing areas, legacy infrastructure challenges. This has to come from the fiscal side. So we continue to see, we'll see what happens at the next MPC meeting, but it looks like they might have to continue raising rates. Does it work? Doesn't seem to. Jobs. Let's quickly talk about Festus Keyamo, who is, of course, our Minister of State for Labor and Employment. He says here, allow me to kindly share the data of job creation by the National Directorate of Employment, the agency for job creation directly under my supervision as mandated by Mr. President. It is contained in a link to a Facebook page, not even their website, of the agency below. A brief breakdown of the efforts of the Ministry of Labor itself is highlighted. Now, here is another interesting thing, because he likes to send missives out. He says, out of sheer ignorance, many Nigerians point to the unemployment rate in Nigeria and heap it on the Ministry of Labor, whereas the statistics relate to all levels of government in Nigeria, from federal to local government. Anyway, look, if you go and look at the homepage of the Ministry of Labor, which we have up here, it literally says ensuring decent work for all Nigerians. I mean, that is, if you check their mandates and if you check their vision, it's about creating jobs and job creation. We go now to the stats that he provided. If you look at the NDE, the Facebook homepage, they said this is an in-depth statistical representation of the National Director of Employment's achievements covering all of its programs and schemes. This is the first page that you get on their stats when you go to their page. You get a table. If you even drill in further into the table, it says self-employment 140,201. There is no guide with respect to the number. As far as the numbers, normally at the top you'll get 2 zeros for 100, 000 zeros for thousands, and so on and so forth for millions. So we're expected to understand here that between 2015 and 2022, self-employment was 272,000 when you've got a labor force that takes about 3 to 5 million people on an annual basis. They now put training. I don't know why they included training in a job creation thing, but they put training for urban, rural. Then they have wage employment. There is no disaggregation of the wage employment. We don't know what sectors they are in. We don't know which particular jobs they're talking about creating, but they just have rural, urban, and then YESO. YESO, I don't know why they put that in there. If you check a look at what YESO is a youth employment and social support operation. It's part of it is component is public works. Another component is conditional cash transfers, and then 3, skills. Doesn't have anything to do with actual jobs. That's what they put in there, and they put their numbers there. We push on further. There's further stats where they have, now look at this. And this is where it gets really troubling. You've got number of job services provided at various job centers across the country from 2015 to 2018. Again, there's no guide with respect to whether this is in hundreds or thousands or millions. So you just have to take the numbers for what they are. At the top there, it says number of job seekers. We're supposed to believe that in total, between 2015 to 2022, only 5,710 people are registered as job seekers. You take the number of job vacancies at the bottom, it comes out at 904. Again, and then check this out at the bottom there, number of job matches facilitated through NELEX. NELEX is the National Electronic Labor Exchange Program. If we take a look at their website is down. It says we'll be back soon. Sorry for the inconvenience. There's nothing. Take a look at the NELEX Twitter page. This is supposed to be an exchange program for the Federal Republic of Nigeria. They have 276 followers. You take a look at the last 3 tweets that NELEX put out. where that was in January the 31st of 2020. It's been about 3 years. So
Well, it will be back in 2027.
Doctor, it's a really tough situation. Anyway, let me close with KPMG Nigeria. KPMG put out a projection for unemployment in the country. They're saying for 2022 was 37.7%, for 2020 is 40.6%. As you know, we haven't gotten updated numbers since Q4 2020. If these numbers hold correct, Nigeria has the highest unemployment in the world.
Well, even KPMG says this is a projection.
Yeah.
And the KPMG is probably dealing with the formal sector. So if you consider underemployment, which is also a very major problem in this economy, then of course you are looking at a large population of unemployed, persons and unemployed persons. Now, with all of this, it's clear that the next administration in Nigeria will have to deal with spiraling inflation, which, as you have correctly said, is responsible for this raging pandemic of empty pockets, which all of us are very familiar with, and we doesn't discriminate, particularly across the middle class spectrum. Then, of course, you have the challenge of slow economic growth, and then you have unemployment. So very serious issues that the next administration of Nigeria would have to address. And you were quoting, paying much attention to statistics provided by the Federal Ministry of Labor and Employment. Well, people lie a lot with statistics in Nigeria, and we have issues with data in terms of accuracy. So you can have a whole, set of data saying different things. And, Festus Keyamo talking about unemployment and what the government has done. Well, did you refer in that report that you are quoting to the hose and wheelbarrows that it was shown, and cutlasses that it was shown distributing in certain parts of Nigeria as evidence that the Buhari administration was creating jobs? Did you provide statistics with what happened with those hose and cutlasses that he was giving out? But he has one point, that oftentimes when we talk about unemployment, we don't talk about the responsibility of the subnationals. Okay, state governments, what are they doing? Local governments, what are they doing? We tend to focus more on the federal government. And it's not only with regard to employment generation, it's with regard to everything else. But whether we need it, or we like it or not, we still have to address the issues of the economy. One of the recommendations from IMF in their World Economic Outlook, charting the way forward for Nigeria specifically, they said, well, Nigeria will have to tighten monetary policy further. We have done so 6 times consecutively.
Indeed.
Inflation rate has been going up 3 times. The highest rate in 17 years, inflation rate. Okay, it could be higher before the end of the year. So these are the challenges that we face. But the issue is, are we going to get the right skill set to begin to move the needle in a more positive direction for the benefit of the average Nigerian? That's up to the next set of people who are going to run Nigeria.
They do.
Well, my concern with that job creation statistics is the fact that he didn't relate it to a current unemployment figure.
Right.
So we can have, you can address issues, but you cannot tell us how well you've addressed an issue if you don't tell us how bad the issue is in the first place, or what it is you're dealing with. The last unemployment figures we had was in 2020, 3 years ago, and at that time was at 33%. The postulation or perhaps the projections by somebody is that it's a lot more than that. We're looking at about, is it 50% or a lot more than that?
Take your pick, yeah.
So as we mentioned a number of times, we have a data problem. We don't have figures. And so when you bring job creation statistics or data, you cannot pat yourself on the back and say you've done a great job if you cannot show us how well you've addressed the issue. In the first place, you cannot tell us how well you've addressed the issue if you don't give us the numbers. So we put it to the Ministry of Labor and Employment to please release unemployment figures. Let Nigerians understand the extent or perhaps how deep the issue we're dealing with is, and then we can begin to begin to address these issues once we understand what it is. And then finally, Rotis, I was going to ask you a question you sort of responded to with regards to the fact that just last week we're talking about the response of the CBN to rising inflation and over the weekend numbers have come out. You said it and you've reiterated it this morning that the tightening, further tightening hasn't seemed to work because whilst interest rates are going up, becoming more difficult for Nigerians to borrow, inflation is still rising.
Right.
Therefore, what else? What else can be done beyond just tightening monetary policy that can be done to address the rising inflation rates?
It all falls on the fiscal side. So those food supply shocks, that list, rising cost of road transportation. Your rail is not disaggregating the amount of load of transport. So most of your goods, 95, 96, 97% move by road. So road transportation costs are impacting that. You've also got, look at Benway, and there wasn't another attack over the weekend or last Friday or so.
Yes.
Insecurity affecting the food producing areas, right? And then your legacy infrastructure issues like power, where 45% of your overhead costs for businesses is from power. So until those, cost push factors are addressed by the fiscal side, monetary policy can be tightening forever and it's not going to impact it.
Right, so next question is this. Obviously, this administration is gone. We cannot hold them to account. The next administration, do you have confidence that they will address these fiscal issues?
I'm hopeful. I'll just leave it at that.
Food inflation in Lagos is 27.92%.
Yep. It's almost, they're pushing 30 now.
I hope we will not get to a point in the city of Lagos where we'll be adopting 101.
We'll be dieting by force. Doctor, it's tough.
These are real issues.
Yeah.
I was listening to a commentary this morning in terms of the house population density and the fact that people are now reducing the number of rooms or accommodation. What people are sharing in a room, and just looking at the effect of, across all sectors, not just in food, in terms of people now trying to adjust, which I think, Doctor, by the way, people already start adjusting.
Yeah, no, Doctor is making a joke, but seriously, it's actually happened.
I don't know who eats 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I don't know who. You pick the one that's most important to you. Maybe if you work in the afternoon, you have a heavy lunch and then just drink water at night.
In the evening.
Some of the people around me, when I see them scooping food, I look at the number of the pieces of meat and I say, no, this is Nigeria. Nobody eats like this anymore.
Very true. In fact, there was even a report on the amount of protein consumption in Nigeria. It's reduced. People are even eating meat anymore, chicken.
People will be eating like termites.
Exactly.
No, please, nobody should eat like that. Please, we're in the season of inflation.
Stop.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you, Rotis.